This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.
Mr. Phil Groce, who is an astronomer, an astrophysicist, and a general savant. And Phil is going to discuss with us tonight something that most people might not be aware of, and that is the extraordinary celestial event that's coming our way in August. And Phil, what is that extraordinary celestial event?
It's the total eclipse of the sun. And I'd like to start with some slide images if I can.
Absolutely, and you know, so this is sort of an unusual thing, is it not? To have
It's a once in a lifetime, literally, experience for most people. This event takes place on Monday, August 21st, 2017. In Eastern Daylight Savings Time, it'll reach maximum around 2:30 p.m. in the afternoon. But let's take a look at what exactly is a solar eclipse. It occurs when the moon passes in front of the sun, blocking the sun completely for a small portion of the Earth. Now, this is different from a lunar eclipse, which is the next slide. And in that eclipse, the moon actually passes into the Earth's shadow. Now, that eclipse can be seen by half of the Earth at a time. So many people have seen lunar eclipses, but very few people have seen a total solar eclipse. Let's take a look at why. You see, the shadow of the moon actually is very, very small on the surface of the Earth. It could be anywhere from, say, a few miles to about 75 miles wide. And even though that sounds like a lot, most of the Earth is covered with water, and most of it's not populated. So very few people have ever seen a total eclipse of the sun. Next image. Here's a fact. Every person in North America will be affected in some way by the 2017 Great American Solar Eclipse. And that sounds like that's a hyperbola, but let me explain why. Let's take a look at it.
That is a rather bold statement.
It is a bold statement, but here's why.
Yes.
Because this eclipse path is going to pass over more cities than any eclipse in modern time. In fact, in the history of mankind, this will be the most watched celestial event. It starts off in Salem, Oregon, goes through Casper, Wyoming, over towards Kansas City, South St. Louis, just a little north of Nashville, just a little north of Athens, Georgia, and then just about at South Carolina, we're going to see a large
Macon
part
is
of it.
in there somewhere. Comments? I mean, are we going to get this?
No, you're not going to be able to see the total solar eclipse. You will not be able to do that. And that's why I'm urging everyone to take this opportunity to actually see this eclipse and travel. So here's what's going to happen is an estimated 12 million people are actually going to, who live under the shadow line of that spot that's only about 50 miles wide. It's estimated, however, that there are 200 million people who live within 1 day's drive of that path. And there, I think, as the news and CNN and National Geographic channels and everyone else and the Weather Channel, they're all planning to go live all the way across the country now. And they expect this to be literally the most watched event in the history of humankind.
Wow.
So what's going to happen in Georgia? Well, it's only going to go through a small sliver of northeast Georgia. And only a tiny part of it, but it's still worse. So that's the closest anyone in Georgia could get to the eclipse path.
So you could drive up there, presumably.
That's exactly right. You could drive up to the northeast corner of Georgia and see it. Now, that's assuming, of course, weather permits.
Yes.
And that's always the big deal. Let's go to the next image if we can, because what we're going to take a look at is how it will appear everywhere else in the country. You see, even though it's going to be a total eclipse for that narrow band, what will the rest of the nation see? Well, they're going to see partial eclipses of the sun. So for them, the moon will look like it's taking a bite out of the sun, like a cookie.
Yes.
But for the most part, that's what they're going to see. But that means that it's still going to be dangerous, because even a sliver of the sun can do as much eye damage as the entire sun. And so all of these people are going to be going outside to look at the sun, and that's one of the great causes of concern, because they could do eye damage.
But we'll discuss that. We'll continue, and we'll get into a fulsome discussion on that.
Well, let's go on to our next image here. This is where I'm going to be.
Oh, really?
I'm going to be at Lake Barkley up in Kentucky. And the reason why I'm going to be there is because the weather is more likely to be better there than, say, in Georgia. It's still a manageable drive from Macon. And from the highway interstate system is such that I can reach, if we go to the next image here, I can reach along about a large amount of potential sites along the path. Now, April 20th and April 22nd, through that period of time, are real important if you're going to go out and find your eclipse spot, because the sun will have the same altitude in the sky on those dates as it will on August 21st. So if you really are serious, that's what you need to do. And this is what I mean. If I'm there in the center of that circle there, I can go 600 miles on either side the night before. I can just drive. I've done it before, believe it or not. And so I can basically find a good weather path. So the secret to seeing an eclipse is to be mobile. Now, hopefully, wherever you set up, you'll have great weather. But if the weather forecast says it's going to be cloudy, my advice is then travel to where the site is going to be clear, because this literally is a once-in-a-lifetime event. Next image, please. By the way, if you miss this eclipse, the next one that's going to be visible in the United States is April 8th, 2024. Now, that actually is pretty lucky, because normally in the United States it can be decades before you see another eclipse, but we'll have another opportunity in 2024. But now I'd like to tell a little story about the great American eclipse of 1834. And this is an amazing eclipse for a lot of different reasons, and extremely important. The next image. This was the first eclipse ever actually mapped by almanacs. Both British almanacs, American almanacs did not have the technology at the time, but British almanacs and German almanacs did have it, and this was the very first one. And this one is important because it went through the state of Georgia. Next image. I've basically laid over this modern map the eclipse path. The red line represents the point of maximum eclipse, and the blue lines outside of that, it's a partial eclipse. And we can see, of course, today, if we had that eclipse, it would go over many cities and many interstates and so on. But in 1834, most of this didn't exist. So let's go to the next image.
It looks like it's passing over Macon. Am I correct?
You are exactly right. This is the second earliest map ever created, eclipse map of North America. And it appeared in the American Almanac and Repository of Useful Information. I love that title, by the way. We should have more almanacs of useful information. Yes, we should. And you can see that path. The other one that you see there is the one of 1831 that happened to also to pass through part of Georgia. But let's take a look at what happened here, because this was the first one where people actually wrote about it, studied it. So what I would like to read to you now is from the Milledgeville paper, and this took place, this is the paper as it was published on December 2nd in 1834. We were prepared for a magnificent spectacle, but the event outwent our anticipations. With thousands of others, we watched the instant when the last beam was shot out, rendering the planetary motion visible. Then it caused us an interval of more than a minute of indescribably awful grandeur, a pall of funeral black drawn over the sun, whose effulgence still broke off around it, and then the first gush of light as it opened out for us for that little instant, while the naked eye, not yet overpowered, could still be fixed on the whole orb of the moving moon. The universal twilight, the appearance of stars, the rosy hue like morning, all around the horizon. Then the sudden chill of temperature showed for the only time in our lives how it would be if the sun should be stricken out in midday. It was a spectacle that terrified the savage and astonished the vulgar eye. It elevated and strengthened all human conception of omnipotent power and showed forth in the wonderful accuracy, even to a second, of the astronomical predictions of the event, another of the triumphs of that grandest and most exact of the sciences. Now, if that doesn't get your blood going.
Well, it's got mine, yes, yes. And
Well, there's another one.
Oh, there's more.
No, there was another one that was done on December 4th, published, and this is out of the Macon Telegraph. Seldom does it fall to the lot of man to witness so rare and sublime a spectacle of nature's wonderful works in the great solar eclipse on Sunday, last the 30th. To see the whole firmament at midday enveloped in the shades of deepening twilight, and the bright stars twinkling as in the majesty of night, to see the fowls seeking their nightly roost, to hear the returning light of the cock, the cock crowing, announcement of the morning, are rare indeed. But to see that bright luminary, whose brilliance will not allow the eye to look upon it without great pain, covered by a veil of blackness, the pall of death, is indeed awful and sublime. So that.
Well, those are pretty impressive, I guess, writers, and I wonder if the present Macon Telegraph editorial staff can do justice to the event that's going to occur soon. Let's hope we've set a high mark for them.
I have seen 3 total eclipses in my life, and attempted to see a 4th one, which was my best one that I didn't see, but we'll talk about that later. But I can tell you that there's something really amazing about it, because we are so confident as modern human beings that we control everything.
Yes.
We're in control in our cars, we control our televisions, and we control the way we live and so on. But when you see something that you count on every day being blotted from the sky and you are powerless to stop it, it is a most humbling effect. I can tell you that you can understand why people got scared,
yes,
why they would sacrifice people to stop it, why they would bang gongs to scare away whatever demon it was that was eating the sun. And it is probably the most, I think, mystical experience you can have on Earth is to watch a total eclipse of the sun. And these quotes from 1834 are not exaggerations. They're pretty accurate.
Now you've actually seen a number of eclipses, and I think there's, let's see, James Taylor. There's a little story about that.
You're so vain. Yes.
I don't know if you know that song, but he supposed you and James Taylor had something in common. Both of you journeyed to Nova Scotia. Is that right?
Carly Simon wrote a song called "You're So Vain," yes, and in that song he wrote, and they were, of course, at the time she was married to James Taylor, and they were getting a divorce. And there's a line in it that you drove, you flew to Nova Scotia to watch the total eclipse of the sun. And
I take it she didn't like that, and I wonder if there's be any domestic tensions that might happen.
Well,
when people in the present eclipse occur.
Well, it could be. I remember that I was at that eclipse.
Really?
I didn't see James Taylor,
but it was a tremendous trip for you, wasn't it?
Well, it was, because I was living in New Orleans at the time, working in an optics lab, and I drove for 25 hours up to Nova Scotia to go see this eclipse.
Wow, was it worth it?
It was stupendous to see the black shadow of the moon coming at you at about 1,400 miles per hour, to experience the drop in temperature, to see the glory of the sun's outer atmosphere, the corona, and to experience all that is a phenomenal experience.
And so we have something to look forward to, but apparently we should exercise some caution because of the retinal damage that could take place. And at this note, I think we'll put some glasses on.
Yeah.
Let's see how we look here. Oh, I can't see a thing. I don't know. Well, we'll just stare out into space, I guess.
Well,
but you have to be extremely cautious.
These are not ordinary sunglasses. And I caution you, whatever you do, don't think you can use ordinary sunglasses to look at the sun. These are special glasses that are available from a number of sources. Probably the most popular one's American Paper Optics. It's a company out of Nashville. But these are called solar eclipse glasses. They block 99.9 99.9999% of light and almost 100% of all ultraviolet light. And this is the safest way to look at the sun during the partial phases. Now, once the sun is gone into totality, then you remove these,
Yes.
and you can look at it, because a total eclipse of the sun is about as bright as a full moon.
Yes.
But what will happen is you'll be able to see stars and planets.
Yes. Yes.
And it's an amazing experience.
Well, I'm concerned that, as I understand it, Macon, Georgia is going to be in the sort of partial eclipse. And I wonder if there's not someone out there walking the streets now that's going to make the wrong move to stare up at the sun and get some retinal damage. Is that a common event that takes place in this eclipse?
There have been people who have experienced eye damage after eclipse. There was an eclipse in Hawaii in the 90s, and there were about 100 people who were reported to hospitals with retinal damage. There are reports all over the world of this, and this is one of the reasons why this show is so important, because our number one message is to make sure that people know, do not look at the sun unless you have the proper protection to do that.
Right. Well, you know, these sunglasses are pretty cool. Maybe I'll put one on again. I don't know. I just wear these around. I guess a certain je ne sais quoi.
They're great for sleeping at the beach too.
Yes. Well, now these are obtainable, findable. People can get them, and so really, we're sort of giving everyone a big warning. Watch out for your vision when this occurs, and it's going to be a spectacular event. And I'm just thinking about just sundry times that eclipses have appeared in the literature. I'm reminded of Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court, and also Apocalypto, which is a recent movie when the Mayans were I think they were Mayans. They were sacrificing people, and then the sun eclipse appeared, and had a really negative impact on the sacrifice arrangements. But the people, they've been able to predict eclipses in the past. I mean, what about in Babylonia, Mesopotamia? People have always been looking at the stars.
Eclipses are probably the most marked and recorded celestial event in history, whether it be all the way back to the Babylonians, to the Egyptians, all the way up through modern times. Even when they couldn't predict them, they recorded them, and that helped people later to accurately develop the mathematics to predict them moving into the future. There will be a time where you will never have a total eclipse of the sun.
Really? Why?
Don't worry, you got about 600 million years, but
we won't be here. Is that the reason?
Because
the moon will leave,
no, because the moon is slowly moving away from the Earth. It moves away a couple of centimeters every single year, and
I take that's bad. I think.
It's bad. Well, it's a couple of things are happening. One is that the Earth is slowing down. We hear where we have to add a second every couple of decades to our clocks in order so that they are accurate. Well, that's because the rotation of the Earth is actually slowing down, and it's caused by the moon. It's kind of like this. If you have an ice skater, as you know, when they get ready to go into the spin, they hold their arms out, and then when they want to go spin faster, they pull their arms in, and when they want to stop or slow down, they put them out again. It's called conservation of angular momentum. And what's happening is, with the Earth-Moon system has a set angular momentum, and as the Earth is slowing down, the Moon is moving farther away, and so eventually it will no longer be able to block the sun.
And well, actually, that's rather, I mean, any change in our orbital arrangements causes a certain chill to run up my spine, I think, because our environment is so delicately poised. Any change in anything has a substantial downside to it, does it not?
Yeah, it does. And what's interesting about this is that the measurements of the moon going away is not science fiction. We actually have mirrors on the surface of the moon actually left by Apollo astronauts, and we do laser ranging. And every day we measure that distance, so we know it pretty accurately. But fossil records, as far back as 600 million years, show that the rotation of the Earth was much faster. 600 million years ago, it was about 21 hours long. The day was 21 hours. And it has slowly changed. The other thing that's going to happen is that over the next several million years, we expect the sun to start enlarging slightly. So the sun is going to be...
That sounds bad to me.
Well,
yes.
yes, it could be.
It's not good,
the sun, as it converts hydrogen to helium At a certain point, it will no longer be able to do that, and it will take helium and convert it to heavy elements.
Yes.
And what will happen is the sun will also get bigger.
Yes.
And so the combination of the moon going farther away and being smaller in terms of its angular size in the sky and the sun getting bigger means that someday you will not, for all the money in China, ever be able to see a total eclipse from the surface of the Earth. And so that's another reason, I think, to enjoy this moment, because you are lucky enough to be born in this time to be able to see one of the greatest natural wonders.
Wow. Well, you know, that's, you know, it's really stimulating to hear these remarks that you've made. I'm thinking about the way the diurnal rhythms work. I mean, they're set on they're not quite set on a 24-hour arrangement. They're more like 23 hours, and so presumably our diurnal rhythms were set back in an earlier time. That'd be an interesting sort of intellectual journey to go on, is to see when the days were. I think the diurnal rhythms run at about 23 hours. If I can, maybe that's the explanation. They've been set back in an earlier time when the days were shorter. So, well, that's a pretty interesting.
Well, the development of the human eye, all those other things in terms of that, and our response, the brain response, all those other things to light, dark.
Yes.
Obviously, a lot of that was set much earlier than what we call modern man. I
Yes.
mean, I want to say one last thing about eclipses. What if it's cloudy?
That could be a problem.
I've set this audience up for the biggest disappointment of all time, and they're going to hate me. I'm going to tell you a story about an eclipse that is my favorite eclipse that I never saw. It happened in 1970. It was in Perry, Florida. The prediction was it was all socked in and rainy, but there was going to be a cold front come through, and it was going to wash it out by the time of the eclipse. And so I decided not to make a run for better weather. I stayed there. And I was wrong. The weather was socked in, but I was at a field which had a farm. There was a pond. There were chickens and guineas and cows and horses all around. And as it got dark, if you think it gets dark when there's a total eclipse, when it's clear, when it's socked in, it's really dark. And what happened was all the guineas flew up into the trees. All the chickens began to roost. The horses and cows laid down to sleep. The temperature dropped. I could hear frogs croaking all of a sudden. All these other things were happening. And so I experienced basically this entire diurnal experience of going to sleep. And then 4 minutes later, the sun came out and everybody woke up as if they'd had the shortest night ever. And it was a great observation of animal behavior.
Yes, they're so influenced by light. Well, now you mentioned 4 minutes. How long can one expect to be immersed in the total darkness of the eclipse?
For this eclipse, it'll be, the maximum time is 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And the closer you are to that center line, the closer you're going to be to 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Towards the end, if you're on the edge of it, it'll only be a few seconds. So the secret is to get as close as you can to that center line.
Can you speculate on Macon, Georgia? I mean, we're going to presumably get a partial eclipse. How long is that going to be in evidence, do you think?
Well, we may actually experience some slight darkening, but there'll be a small sliver. I think about 97% of the sun will be covered.
Yes.
So there'll be only 3% here. But that's 3% still puts out a lot of light.
And you can still be, a retina can still be injured.
Right. The difference is instead of having a round hole burned in your retina, you have a crescent burned in your retina.
Small little dip.
Right, and so there's the eye damage is still there.
Yes, yes. So we still have to be cautious about that. Well, it's a pretty extraordinary, I guess, story you've given us. How did you get interested in this sort of thing? Now I know you set planetariums up around the world, and you have a tremendous interest in this, but did this just come naturally? Your interest in just an accident, or?
I was born in New Orleans, grew up there. There was a famous amusement park at the time called Pontchartrain Beach, and there was a person who had a large telescope, and it was during the opposition of Mars, when Mars was closest to Earth, and he charged a quarter a look.
Yes. Okay.
Okay, so and in those days, and this is
Quarters is substantial.
Yeah, quarters is substantial, but I, my parents would give me $1 and say, go out and find a ride or go do what you want to do.
Right.
And lo and behold, I went to see Mars, and I spent my entire dollar.
Yes.
Watching Mars. The next time I came the next night, he said, look, you've paid. So I got to go every time to Pontchartrain Beach and just look through telescopes and so on. When my folks were moving out of New Orleans, they bought a horse farm on the north side of Lake Pontchartrain, which had pristine dark skies at the time. I was 12, and I fell in love with the night sky.
Yes.
And out of that grew a great love of astronomy and physics and
Yes.
just learning about the Earth.
Yes, and you that's a human thing, is it not? I mean, for our ancestors, shepherds out in the fields to looking after their sheep, or just anyone, you could look at the sky and there was no light pollution, and then people imagined that the impact of the stars, the sun, the moon, they were powerful. I guess, beacons for their imagination. And the early gods and goddesses were the gods of the sun, gods of the moon, the stars. And the idea that they influenced human behavior was strongly out there, was it not?
Yeah, it's no accident that every religion is occupied with the heavens.
Yes.
And as it should be. You know, I'm often asked, do you think that there's life out among the stars? And my answer is, I think, statistically, there has to be.
Yes.
I can't believe that we're the only ones here. But let's suppose that I'm wrong and that we are the only creatures. We're the only sentient beings. Then, to me, that's also an interesting point of view, because it means that we have a responsibility. If we're the only ones who can actually appreciate the heavens,
yes.
if we're the only ones here who have enough intelligence to be able to do these things, then we have a terrific responsibility to do just that.
Yes. And you could say our species needs to continue. So we have all the difficulties we face in the modern world, all the ups and downs. Well, now we're nearing the end of our interchange, but you also do things like put planetariums up, and you do that all over the world. Is that right?
That's
it must be a fascinating career and job to do.
Yeah, I do almost no local work,
well, they're not,
but
yes.
no, but I've done probably 4 planetariums in the state of Georgia, but most of my work is outside. I'm working on projects right now in Iceland. In California. I'm a design consultant for a Japanese planetarium company. I do a lot of design work for that. I've worked on planetariums large and small, the largest in the world and some of the smallest.
Wow.
And I've been very blessed that I'm able to take this excitement that I have about astronomy and transfer it into theaters where people can go and learn about the sky.
Well, Philip, it's been great listening to your epistle tonight, and I'm certainly going to be ready for that eclipse. And I'm going to close out by putting these glasses on and saying, well, let's just say goodbye to each other. Okay, thank you so much.
Wait a minute.
All right.
All right.
Well, remember to wear your glasses there. All right, thanks a lot. Thank you. We'll have to have you back
Thank
again.
you.
Thank you.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.